Okay, so thanks very much for joining me today for this webinar all about ways that you can celebrate Generosity Week in your church. So I'm Janet Edmond, I'm the Senior Stewardship Officer for the Diocese, and I'm going to be presenting just a few ideas to help you think about Generosity Week and what you might do in your church later on in the autumn. But it's by no means every idea. If you come up with different things, that's great. And I'll be happy at the end of the presentation to hear all your ideas. Hope you can share them with me. September is not that far away when Generosity Week actually takes place. So I'm doing these webinars now to try and get everybody thinking and planning ahead. So Generosity Week itself is an initiative that is run by the National Church, and this year it's being run between the 24th of September and the 1st of October. So the 24th of September is a Sunday and it runs to the following Sunday, the 1st of October. And this is the third year that we've run, or the National Church has run Generosity Week. So it's starting to gather a little bit of momentum. And more churches are starting to get involved with it, which is great. So Generosity takes place during the harvest season. That's when the National Church actually run it during harvest. So that I guess it's run at that time because it's a time when we traditionally do thank God for his generosity, and it also gives us that chance to focus on our generosity and how we might respond to God's generosity. So I think that's the reason why the National Church run it during the harvest period. And if you're not familiar with what Generosity Week actually is, it's actually an 8-day period from one Sunday to the next Sunday, where we can all focus on generosity and how we can nurture and encourage generosity in our daily lives, how we can live more generously and inspire others to live more generous lives as well. And it's also an opportunity to think and live out our Christian values. It's a time when we can focus on what generosity means to us, and we can reflect on our understanding of the generosity that is shown by God and how we respond to God's generosity in our own actions and in our own words. So that's what Generosity Week is intended to do. And there are specific aims that we want to try and achieve during Generosity Week. Obviously, we want to, as we're focusing on God's generosity to us, we want to try and understand more of what God's generosity is towards us, and see if we can respond to that by how we can develop our own generosity and live more generous lives. But we also want to inspire others as well to think about generosity and what it means to them, and try to build that culture of generosity within our worshipping communities and try to reach out to the wider community as well. And also celebrating. It's not just about thinking about giving and giving money and that sort of thing. I mean, that is involved in generosity, obviously, but it's also thinking about celebrating the everyday acts of generosity that we see all around us in our churches and also in our wider communities. And we want to give thanks as well to everyone who does give so generously of their time to enable our mission and ministry to flourish. So Generosity Week itself is a much bigger thing than just thinking about giving. It's about trying to inspire generosity and to build a generous culture. So how can you get involved with Generosity Week itself? Well, I've talked to you about Generosity Week taking place between the 24th of September and the 1st of October, and that's when the National Church is celebrating Generosity Week. However, Generosity Week itself is flexible, and it is designed to suit all types of church as well, whether you're a small church, whether you have a small congregation, or whether you're a larger church. And Generosity Week can actually take place at any time. It doesn't have to be during the harvest week that we're talking about, that the National Church has set it for. It can happen at any time at all. It can happen when it suits your church best. So if the 24th of September to the 1st of October doesn't suit your church, pick a week that will suit your church better and make that your generosity week this year. And when you get around to thinking about Generosity Week and discussing it, if you want to talk through your plans and see what support is available, what support the stewardship team can give you, do contact myself for help and advice about Generosity Week and what resources are available. I am going to be looking at some of the resources that are available to you at the moment. There's a link here, summary of resources, that you can click on when you get the PDF version of this meeting, this presentation, and you can click on that and it will take you to all the resources that are already created for you to use. What I would say is, when you do pick a week for Generosity Week, make sure that you've got enough people to help you run it. And to help you deliver the activities that you want to run during Generosity Week. And think about the 2 Sundays, how you're going to plan those 2 Sundays, the first Sunday and the second Sunday. Now, the National Church give you resources so that on the first Sunday you can explore generosity itself. And then on the second Sunday of Generosity Week, you can explore gratitude. So that's one to think about, how you plan those 2 Sundays and how it will fit in with your congregation. This is an example of the Generosity Week resources, or a summary of the resources that were available last year in 2022, that were made available by the National Church and by dioceses around the country. We were all developing different resources. You can see that there were resources to promote Generosity Week. So you'll find resources, when you click on the links, you'll find resources to promote Generosity Week, flyers. There's a video that was created last year that you can actually adapt for your church. If you can use the video generator on a church near you to do that. There's also social media posts that are already written that you can use on your Facebook page, if you have a Facebook page, or on your website. And there's other things as well. There's a PowerPoint template, email signatures. There's all that kind of stuff there to help you promote Generosity Week, whatever you're doing in your church. A big aspect of the Generosity Week resources was the downloadable podcasts that were created last year. And they are still available for you to use and download. And they're about 5 minutes long, each of the podcasts, and they have different people talking about generosity and what it means to them. So it's quite a personal reflection on different aspects of generosity, and they're really nice to listen to. So they're good reflections about generosity. And after them as well, after you've listened to them, it asks you to reflect on what's the passages that have been spoken and the concept behind the stories, and also what activities you can actually do yourself. So I'll show you an example of them as we go through. Other resources that were available last year that are still available for you, created by the Diocese of Liverpool. There were some resources to help young people explore generosity and that concept of generosity. There were also resources that the Diocese of Leeds put together to help young people and children explore generosity, some activities that they can do. And also last year there was a resource that would help you to think about how you could involve and engage the wider community, not your worshipping community, but your wider community within Generosity Week at your church. There's also some resources available to help you celebrate legacies, exploring the legacy idea behind generosity and how members of your community, your wider community, and your congregations can think about passing on that legacy to the future. More about that later. There's lots of liturgical resources There's prayers that have already been written, service material, celebrating generosity and gratitude, and lots of service content that you can use. And then after Generosity Week, obviously, we shouldn't stop thinking about generosity. It should continue throughout the year. So after Generosity Week, there are some resources as well that you can use to keep thinking about generosity as you go through the year. Other activities that you can do to help keep building that generous culture. Just as a reminder here, I've put here that there is a national online Eucharist service to celebrate generosity that is taking place on the 24th of September, that first Sunday of Generosity Week. More details will become available about that on the Church of England website and on the diocesan website. But on the links at the side here, you will find links to all of the resources that I've mentioned. And also there was a webinar that was recorded last year, I think by the Diocese of Newcastle. That webinar is still available, and it talks about how you can run Generosity Week as well, and more help really and support there. So ways that you can get involved with Generosity Week, things that you can consider doing at your church, activities. How about doing a themed service, as I mentioned earlier, one on generosity on the first Sunday of Generosity Week, and then one on gratitude on the second Sunday. And you can use the service content that's already been created. So that's something quite simple that you can do for your congregations. There's also activities for young children and young people and children to explore that concept of generosity, as I mentioned earlier. So you could maybe have an activity at Sunday school, for instance. And it's quite a difficult concept for young people to think about. So have a look at the resources for young people that I mentioned, and see what activities that you can plan at church during Generosity Week. A little bit more work might be involved in actually running a fundraising event during Generosity Week. It may be that you are thinking of launching a fundraising campaign to repair the roof, to look at maintaining your church, which is also a historic building. And we find that the wider community is more likely to engage with fundraising events around maintaining a historic building. So that's maybe something to think about for Generosity Week, something that would involve the wider community. Also, you could think of running a giving campaign, a stewardship campaign or giving program. There's lots of examples of those resources as well. If you think it's time for you to think about doing that in the church, you could launch it during Generosity Week. You could have a gift day on the first Sunday, for instance. And I also mentioned about celebrating and Thanksgiving events. Last year, I went along to a celebration event from one church. They actually had raised a lot of money to replace the roof. And on the start of Generosity Week, they had a celebration event to thank everyone for their generosity in raising the funds for their project. And they ran a slideshow of all the work that had been done on the roof. They had wine and cheese and all that sort of thing. It was really lovely, just everybody getting together, feeling valued and thanked for what their generosity and the efforts that they'd made. So that's something you could think about doing, running a celebration, Thanksgiving event, just for your volunteers at church and for all that they do. Something else you could think about, if you have a lot of younger people maybe in your congregation, to get them engaged, maybe you could have a social media takeover. What I mean by that is to use your social media platforms such as Facebook. If you use Twitter and that sort of thing, you can share stories about generosity on social media. One thing you could ask people to do in your congregation is perhaps maybe make a 30-second video on their smartphone about what they think of generosity, and then put that out on social media to share their stories with people in your own church and beyond. And that's something that maybe the younger members of your congregation will respond to and engage with. And then also you could have a more planned approach where you could run workshops for small groups where you can explore generosity and how to build a generous church. And there are specific workshop content that I will share with you today that will help you do that. Here's some of them, just an example of some of the resources that I mentioned earlier. There's a document about celebrating Generosity Week in the wider community, so you can read through that to get some ideas. I mentioned about a fundraising campaign for maintaining the building. We know that people in the wider community tend to engage with fundraising for specific things, and they like to engage with maintaining culture and heritage. So that's maybe something that you could run during Generosity Week to engage the wider community. There's the document that we produced, our education team produced last year about exploring stewardship with children and young people. And there's an example of the service content that's available for you to use to celebrate your first Sunday service, celebrating generosity, a Eucharist service. If you click on any of these images, you will see the links come up there to take you to the documentation itself. So again, more ideas. How can you choose what to do? Commuters, for instance, or young people, I mentioned about linking to stories that you could share on your social media platform. Also, there's the podcasts that are available on the Church of England website that I mentioned, where you could link to them as well, so that people can listen to that on their way to work every day. That's a nice thing to do during Generosity Week. Just listen for 5 minutes to a podcast about somebody else talking about what generosity means to them. If you have a fabulous historic church, you could run a celebrating our legacy morning, something I mentioned earlier. We have some booklets that I'll show you in a second that will help you to run a celebrating our legacy event one morning, where you can invite people to come into the church and you can ask them to reflect on aspects of the church, and also get them to reflect on the material and spiritual legacy that they may have received from all of the things that we value in life, and what our role might be on passing on that legacy to future generations. And the booklets themselves will talk you through how to lead that type of event. There's also a booklet for the participants as well, to encourage them to think about those things, and then when they go away from the legacy event, then they can continue to think about whether they might leave a legacy to the church. Obviously, that's a longer term thing to encourage, but you have to sow the seeds of it somehow. And so running a legacy morning during Generosity Week might be the way to start that. If you have a small congregation and it's difficult to fundraise, as I mentioned earlier, think about how you can engage with the wider community for fundraising for the building. I mentioned about generosity sessions in Sunday school, for instance, for your children. And then thinking about after Generosity Week, home groups, that's smaller groups that maybe can meet at home, in somebody's home, and you can, a half-day fika, it's called. A fika is something I'll explain in a bit, but it's for smaller groups of people to reflect and explore God's generosity to us. So it's more of a spiritual approach there, to reflect on generosity and looking at videos and working together as a small group. But then again, you can use all the liturgical material to think about your prayers that you can have every morning, or evening prayers that you can have at church. Just some ideas that you can engage with. Here's, I mentioned about the podcasts that were available from last year. They are still on the website, and there will be some new podcasts produced for 2023, but you can go and listen to the podcasts that are still there from last year. So here we are, Reverend Harry Steele was talking about his idea of thoughts and generosity. And then, as I said, you can click on the link there to encourage you to reflect on the story that Harry has been sharing, and also he suggests an activity as well of what you can do that day to live out your generosity, inspired by the podcast. I just included this slide here because this has come from Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York. He was talking about all the resources that had been produced last year for Generosity Week, saying that, you know, our faith starts with the most generous gift of all, which is God's gift to us. And really just how he felt that all of the resources that were available were really inspiring and encouraging. So it's nice to get his take on that as well, and encourage you to look at the resources to see how you can use them. I mentioned about the running a Celebrating Our Legacies morning at church. This is the type of information that's available. There's a leader's guide here. There's a document here that will talk you through how to run the session. There are some prayers in here that you can have at the beginning of the session. It might involve a tour around the church, looking at some of the historical aspects of the architecture, the stained glass windows, for instance, that connected with the church. And there's also a booklet here for the participants that will encourage them to consider the historic value of the church, and also the stories of the people that have been involved with the church over the years, and how those stories have been passed down to us through time. And that will hopefully encourage people to think about how they can share their own stories, and then think about how they can pass on their legacy going forward, so that future generations can also learn about their thoughts. It's not an easy thing to do, talking about legacies, but I think these booklets make it, you know, a bit more easy to introduce the subject. It may just be for a small group, and it may be something that you want to try. If you're interested in doing that, do contact me to talk through what you want to do, and we can discuss it and see what support we can give you on that. I'm really keen to encourage churches to think more about how they can encourage their worshipping community and their wider community to leave legacies to their local church. Something that is available now for you to sign up to is the Generosity Week newsletter. This is something that has been produced by the National Church. They are having a Generosity Week newsletter that is coming out every month. So if you sign up here at this link, you will be subscribing to the free newsletter, and we will get it every month. And in that newsletter, there will be ideas about what you can do for Generosity Week, and also what resources are available to help you, that are being produced by the National Church and around the dioceses around the country. So if you do anything after today's session, sign up to the Generosity Week newsletter, and you'll get some good ideas coming through every month. And that you'll get a newsletter every month now until up to Generosity Week itself. And then also, when the new resources become available, such as the new podcasts, there will be links in the newsletter that will take you to those new resources. So it's really worth having that. Last year, they actually had a similar thing. They had the Generosity Week newsletter that you got every week, leading up from 10 weeks before Generosity Week. And it was a similar thing. It's every month this year. Last year's Generosity Week newsletters, though, are still available on the Church of England website and on the diocesan website. Something that I'm very passionate about, you probably know that I'm the parish giving scheme representative for the diocese, and I handle all the registrations for the parish giving scheme. And I'm really keen to try and encourage churches to think about registering for the parish giving scheme if they haven't already done so, and then launching the parish giving scheme to the congregation during Generosity Week this year. So I'm really keen to sow the seed of that idea. And also, if you've already registered for the parish giving scheme and you've already launched it to your congregation, and it's been some time since you've done that, how about relaunching the parish giving scheme again? Because there's always new people coming into the congregation, people thinking about, oh, maybe I will join the parish giving scheme, maybe I will start to give through the parish giving scheme. So do think about that. I mean, launching during harvest time is a really good time to do that. It's because we're thinking about giving thanks to God. So we know that by launching the parish giving scheme during a time when you're either running a giving program or you're focusing on giving, does have a greater impact for your parish giving scheme. You're more likely to get more people to join the parish giving scheme and actually reflect on their giving. It is also to launch it during Generosity Week is a good time to introduce that new mechanism to enable the regular giving from your congregation, which will help ultimately for your ministry to grow and flourish. And the great thing about the parish giving scheme as well is that there is that unique benefit that you can encourage people to sign up to inflate their giving every year, which is something that people forget to do with a standing order. But with the parish giving scheme, because it's a direct debit, it's something that they can sign up to do when they start to give through the parish giving scheme. However, be reassured that it's not a binding thing. People can opt out of increasing their giving automatically every year as well. So, but do think about that for launching the parish giving scheme. And the PGS team themselves really fully support Generosity Week, and they themselves have provided lots of promotional resources that will help you to get the message out about parish giving scheme. If you want to register for the parish giving scheme and you want more information about it, there is a link here on the diocesan website that you can visit, and you'll find out more information there. Here's an example of some of the resources that are available. There's a guide here on how to launch the PGS for the first time, how to introduce it to your congregations. And there's also posters here that have been produced by the PGS team themselves that you can use in church to, again, promote the parish giving scheme and link it with Generosity Week itself. And again, there's a link here to finding out how to register for the parish giving scheme. The PGS team as well created some resources for social media sharing, social media content that you can use on your Facebook pages. Just some examples here of the sorts of content that you can program to go out on your Facebook page, just to keep getting that message about living generously and about the PGS as well. So think about using those if you're launching the PGS. New resources that are coming along for 2023. I've mentioned some of them already. There's more podcasts coming along, new ones. There's going to be details about how to run a Generosity Sunday. There will be new prayers and service content coming out. And I mentioned as well about the National Online Eucharist service that will be available for you to join in with on the first Sunday of Generosity Week. There's also Canva templates to make your own leaflets and posters. Now, Canva, if you haven't used it before, is a software program that's free to use. And it's really great, actually, when you start using it. You can create all sorts of nice graphics for the church. So we'll be producing some templates for you to then add in your church details onto that if you are running events. So you'll have your own bespoke posters that you can use to promote Generosity Week and the events that you're wanting to run. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that Generosity Week itself is just a start. We should really be thinking about God's generosity and how we can respond to that throughout the year. And obviously Generosity Week is a great focus to start that and to start everyone thinking about living a more generous life. But after Generosity Week, life goes on and generosity goes on. And so there are some resources available that will help you, that you can run throughout the year to think about, continue to think about generosity and what it means. You can continue to explore generosity by running a generosity fika. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Now, this is an activity for a small group of people. You can either do it in somebody's home, or you could do it in a quiet place in church where you have a small group of people coming together, really to talk about generosity, explore the spiritual meaning of generosity, and it also involves coffee and cake as well. And actually, fika is a Swedish word that involves 7 types of cake, I believe, and coffee. So it's an event where you can watch videos that are specific and showing you acts of generosity, which you can then reflect on individually and discuss as a group, and therefore explore the more deeper spiritual nature of God's generosity and what it means to you, and how you can work towards being a sacrificial giver. Also, something that you can do as a PCC is to have a generosity checkup. Now, what this means is that, at least once a year as a PCC, you can look through what you're doing already to build a generous culture within your worshipping community. What can you do to encourage people to think about their faith and generosity, how they meet, and think about what they can do to explore generosity further. And it may be that there's certain messages that you can give out during the year, things that you're doing, joining the parish giving scheme, for instance, using your social media, your website to encourage giving, how you're thinking about legacies, all of these things. There's a template available that you can run through as a PCC and look to see what things you're doing already and what opportunities there are for you to start doing that will help you to continue building a generous church. Now, the fika that I mentioned, a fika event, there's actually here, I forgot to say that this is actually a link to a video by Jonathan de Bernhard Wood, who is our national giving advisor for the Church of England, and he talks you through how to run a generosity fika event. So that's a really nice little video. He's really engaging, as well as Jonathan. So a nice one to listen to if you're thinking about doing that type of event. I've never been to a fika event, so if anybody is thinking of doing a fika event, I'd be really interested in being part of it. So do let me know if that's something you'd like to do. So just to recap then, before questions, Generosity Week encourages us to celebrate God's generosity and how we can live that out in our churches and parishes. It enables us to reflect and focus on what each of us is thankful for and grateful for. Helps us to reflect on how we as individuals can live more generously and how we can encourage our church community as well to explore generosity and live more generously. We can reflect on our own giving in money, certainly, but it's not just about money. It's also about celebrating and reflecting on the time that we can give and the talents that we have that we can share, and celebrating and thanking people for all that they do. And also we can focus on reviewing our giving and the different ways in which we can give. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm now hoping to answer your questions if you have any. I'm going to stop the recording now. I'd say thank you very much, though, for coming along today. And I'm hoping to discuss more now with you what we can do to think about Generosity Week.